Well, and just to add to that, the snowstorm that took place a couple of years ago that crippled the city, that had everything to do with, that had more to do with race than it had to do with ice. Deals cut in the 60s and 70s than actual ice. But to speak to the 1970s and to talk about Maynard Jackson, I will go on record right here and I will say this loudly: there is not a black politician that did more for black people than Maynard Holbrook Jackson Jr. When Mayor Jackson passed away in Washington, D.C. in 2003, one of the things I argue in my book is that he died prematurely because he gave so much. And in saying this about him, just to give you all just a little, I mean, I know you guys may know him, but it's interesting when you do interviews with the people that loved him and know him. Maynard was a fifth-generation Georgian on both sides. Grandfathers were major pastors, were major people. One grandfather was a pastor of Wheat Street. The other was John Wesley Dobbs, the unofficial mayor of the Sweet Auburn district, and so he was the highest-ranking Negro Mason in all of Georgia. He was the first male child born in the Dobbs family in 50 years. John Wesley Dobbs had 6 daughters. And so at the age of 15, his father passed away. So John Wesley Dobbs, who helped to create the Atlanta Negro Voters League in 1946, which was a result of the King v. Chapman case where Premier King strikes down the all-white Georgia primary here in the state, when Maynard Jackson decides to become involved in politics, it's because Grandpa Dobbs had done so much work with him, okay? So King is assassinated in 1968. Maynard is back in the city as a young lawyer. He understands this, but when Robert Kennedy is assassinated, he's in Lewisburg, North Carolina with Bunny Jackson, who's now Bunny Jackson Ransom, showing off the new baby to the in-laws. He comes back to Atlanta to tell people that he's not running for a county seat. He borrows money from Leroy Harris Ogden. And what happens is he ends up running for the U.S. Senate. He loses, but he carries Atlanta. He never asked his wife anything about it. So basically he runs for the Senate, yet married folk do not do that. You need to talk with your people. He then runs for vice mayor. He's elected vice mayor. In 73, he runs for mayor. He becomes the first mayor. And his arrival on the political scene is he annoyed the black political kingmakers. He annoyed Jesse Hill and all those guys because they felt if there was going to be a black mayor, it should have been Vernon Jordan or Leroy Johnson. Q.B. Williamson was even thrown in that mix. These were other politicians. But he was able to understand the concept of what I call the Black New South. The Black New South is partially looking at the American North and Midwest due to the Great Migration that shows that these areas were not the land of milk and honey for black folk, and so many of them that had migrated were deciding to come back south, but they wanted to move to cities, and so you have that movement coming back. You also have the Atlanta University Center that's here, and people are here being educated, and as a result, they stay in the city. The Sun Belt boom, the tech boom, that moves us out of the Cold War kind of industrial conversation. You see numerous tax breaks that promote folk to move back south. And so with this, when Maynard gets in office, he gives 35% of all city contractors to minority contractors. Maynard Jackson makes a lot of black millionaires in this city. I argue that every slickster in the black world decided to come to Atlanta. Over the 3 terms as mayor, 73 to 81, and 89 to 93, there were about $8 billion in city contracts. He gives 35% of that $8 billion to minority contractors. That's about $2.8 billion. So that is who he is, but there were 2 things very quickly that people were extremely critical of him. The first was the sanitation workers. He fired the sanitation workers because they were striking against him, and there's a long conversation around that. But the second was how it was perceived that he mishandled the Atlanta youth murders. You all publicly know of 28 to 29 victims over a 2 or 3 year period. Research suggests that it was more like a 10-year period, and there may have been about 373 victims. That's all well researched, and you'll see that a little bit later. That was the critique of him, but even today, Maynard Jackson is a sacred cow in this city. And so that's what the 70s yielded. It yielded an opportunity for black folk with black political power. Lastly, he does create the Bureau of Cultural Affairs to bring black expressive art to complement his black political empowerment. And so that's where we are in the 1970s.